The letter came addressed to me, but the account number inside belonged to someone else. I sat at my own kitchen table holding a bank statement I had never requested, for a trust I had never heard of, and the first name on it was my daughter-in-law's. Not mine, not my late wife's, hers. $312,000, moved in increments over 14 months, out of an account that still had my name on the paperwork. I read it twice, then I folded it along its original crease, put it back in the envelope, and sat very still. My name is Walter Pruitt. I am 68 years old, a retired structural engineer from Millbrook Heights, outside Portland. For 36 years I signed my name to blueprints that held up hospitals and bridges, and I built exactly one habit that never left me. Check the load before you trust the structure. That afternoon, sitting in my own kitchen, I understood that somewhere in my family, a beam had been quietly removed, and nobody had bothered to tell the man whose house was still standing on top of it. I didn't call my son, not yet, because the second thing 36 years of engineering teaches you is this. You don't shout "it's collapsing" the moment you see one crack. You go find every other crack first. My son Owen was 34, married 4 years to a woman named Dana, who worked as a bookkeeper for a mid-sized property management company downtown. When my wife Ruth died 6 years ago, I did what I imagine most fathers do. I folded my life smaller so there'd be room in it for my sons. I paid off Owen's student loans without being asked. I co-signed the loan on his first house. When Dana's father passed and left her nothing but debt, I quietly covered the funeral, and I never once mentioned it again, because that's not what you hold over someone's head. It's just what you do. 2 years ago, I signed a durable power of attorney making Owen my agent, should anything ever happen to me. A stroke, an accident, the kind of thing you plan for so your children don't have to plan in a panic. I also added Dana as a secondary contact on my main bank account, at Owen's suggestion, just in case something happens to both of us at once. Dad, you know how flights are. I remember thinking it was thoughtful. I remember telling Ruth's sister, at Thanksgiving, that I'd finally found some peace, that my son had grown into exactly the kind of man I'd hoped he would. I want you to sit with that for a second, because that's the version of this story where nothing goes wrong. That's the version I believed in for 4 more years. The trust statement had arrived by mistake. The bank had an old joint mailing address on file from when Owen and Dana lived with me during their house renovation, and a clerical error sent one piece of correspondence to my address instead of theirs. One piece. That's all it takes. I called the number on the statement, gave my name, and a representative named Carla, very pleasant, very unaware she was handing me a loaded weapon, confirmed that the Pruitt Family Legacy Trust had been established 16 months earlier, with Dana Pruitt listed as trustee and sole authorized signer, funded through what she described as the standard transfer schedule you and your son set up. I hadn't set anything up. I asked her, calm as I could manage, "Can you tell me the date the trust was established?" March 14th. I checked my calendar from that week later that night. March 14th was the day Owen and Dana had taken me to lunch at the Marigold Grill and asked me to sign what they called some updated estate paperwork. "Just cleaning up the old stuff, Dad, nothing major." I signed 6 pages that day without reading past the first paragraph of each, because my son slid them across the table between the breadbasket and the check, and because I trusted him the way you trust gravity, completely and without checking. That night I went into my study and pulled the folder where I keep copies of everything I sign. The pages matched. My signature was real. I had authorized this myself, blind, at a lunch table, because my son asked me to. That's not betrayal by forgery. That's betrayal by trust. And it is so much harder to prove, and so much colder to sit with. I did not confront my son. I want to be honest with you about why, because I've turned this over more nights than I'd like to admit. Part of it was strategy. Part of it was that I genuinely could not yet tell whether Owen understood what he'd done, or whether Dana had handled every piece of it herself and simply needed his signature the way a contractor needs a permit, a formality, barely glanced at. So I watched. I kept coming to Sunday dinner. I kept asking about Dana's work, about Owen's job at the logistics company, about whether they were still thinking of having kids. I let them believe the quiet, agreeable version of Walter Pruitt was still sitting across the table. 3 weeks in, Dana handed me my own moment of proof without knowing it. We were clearing plates, and her phone buzzed on the counter with a text preview visible. Confirmed. Transfer 4 scheduled for the 1st, same as before. W won't check the Trust Act. He doesn't even know the login exists. She picked it up half a second too late. I had already read it standing at the sink with a dish towel in my hand, and I said nothing, because 40 years of reading structural stress had taught me that a crack you announce is a crack someone can patch before you finish your sentence. I dried the plate. I asked if anyone wanted coffee, and upstairs, later that night, I started writing everything down. I called an old colleague from my engineering firm's legal department, a retired estate attorney named Pruitt, who had handled 2 of my old partner's wills, and knew me well enough to take my call seriously the moment I said the words, durable power of attorney, and trust I never authorized. We spent 6 weeks doing what I know how to do, documenting load points before the whole thing gives way. Pruitt pulled the original power of attorney and found Owen had never actually invoked it. The trust had been created using my genuine signature on paperwork that misrepresented what it was, a form of fraud in the inducement, she called it, meaning I had been tricked into agreeing to something by being told it was something else entirely. We requested the trust's full transaction history. 4 transfers, totaling $312,000, moved from my primary investment account into the trust, then from the trust into an account in Dana's name alone. Not joint with Owen, not held for family, hers. Pruitt froze what could be frozen through a formal notice to the bank's fraud department, revoked the power of attorney entirely, and had me execute a brand new will and financial directive naming her firm as executor, removing Owen and Dana from every document that once carried their names. All of it filed quietly, all of it dated and time-stamped, before anyone in my family knew a single thing had changed. They're going to notice the accounts eventually, Pruitt warned me. When they do, they'll move fast and sloppy. Let them. It took 11 days for the freeze to trigger a fraud alert on the trust account, which meant it took 11 days for Owen to call me sounding like a man, walking on a floor he suddenly wasn't sure would hold. Dad, the bank's saying something's wrong with the trust. Did you do something? I told him I'd noticed some strange activity too, and that I'd already reported it to the bank myself, which was true. I did not mention Pruitt. I did not mention the will. I asked him, gently, if there was anything he thought I should know, and he said no. Everything was fine, probably just a clerical error, and I said that's probably it, and we hung up, and I sat in my study feeling something I hadn't expected to feel yet. Not triumph. Just confirmation. The beam really was gone. Now I knew exactly where. 2 nights later, my new security camera in the driveway, installed, I told them. For peace of mind, at my age, caught Dana's car arriving at 11:40 at night. She didn't come to the door. She sat in the car with her phone light on for 11 minutes, then left. Pruitt later confirmed that was the same night the bank's fraud team called the trust's registered contact number for verification. Dana never picked up. She sat in my driveway instead, deciding what story to tell. Pruitt's paralegal cross-referenced the transfer dates against Dana's own bank records, obtained through the fraud complaint we'd filed, and found a pattern that made the picture whole. Every transfer out of the trust landed first in Dana's personal account, and within days moved again, toward a property management company's escrow account. Her employer's. It turned out Dana hadn't stolen my money to spend it. She'd stolen it to cover a shortfall she'd created somewhere else, an internal loan she'd taken from client escrow funds at her own job, 2 years earlier, that she'd never repaid, and that her employer's quarterly audit was closing in on. My son's wife hadn't married into my family to take from me directly. She'd used my trust as a patch for a hole she'd already dug at work, and Owen, whether he understood the full shape of it or simply chose not to ask, had signed whatever she put in front of him at a lunch table, the same way I once had. I sat with that for a long while. There is a particular kind of quiet that comes from realizing your son wasn't cruel. He was careless with the one thing I'd never been careless with in 36 years of holding buildings up, paying attention to who's actually bearing the load. We met in Priya's conference room on a Thursday morning. Owen, Dana, their attorney, and me. I brought nothing but a folder because Priya had already sent theirs a full accounting 3 days prior, and I wanted to watch their faces read it in real time, one more time, across a table. I kept my voice level the entire meeting. I told Owen the trust had been built through a legal misrepresentation, that the funds inside it had been used to cover a debt at Dana's workplace, and that the bank, my attorney, and I had already documented the full trail. Dana said the word misunderstanding 3 times. Her attorney tried family miscommunication once. Owen said nothing for the first 11 minutes, and then he said the only true sentence in the room. I signed what she gave me. I didn't ask what it was. I know, I told him. That's the part I have to live with too. I laid out the settlement Priya and I had built. Full restitution of the $312,000, a formal release of Dana's remaining claim to any future inheritance, and a signed acknowledgement that would be forwarded, at my discretion, to her employer's internal audit team, since her original theft from escrow funds was, frankly, no longer my problem to protect her from. Dana's attorney tried to negotiate the last point. I told them there was nothing to negotiate. The report had already been prepared. Whether it got sent depended entirely on whether the restitution cleared on schedule. The restitution cleared in full within 60 days, largely because Dana's parents, mortified, covered the difference her own accounts couldn't. Her employer's audit found the escrow shortfall independently 3 months later anyway. My report was never even needed. And she lost her license to work in property management in the state of Oregon, along with the job itself. Owen moved out of their apartment on a Tuesday I only know about because Priya's office received the change of address notice. He didn't call to tell me himself. I understood that. Some silences aren't cowardice. Some of them are just a man needing time to figure out what kind of son he still wants to be. The marriage ended formally 8 months later. I heard through Ruth's sister, who still talks to people who still talk to people, that Dana moved to Spokane. I don't know more than that, and I've stopped needing to. It's been 2 years now. Owen and I have dinner every other Sunday again, though it's quieter than it used to be, and better for it. He asked me, about a year in, why I never yelled at him, not once, through any of it. I told him the truth, that 36 years of engineering teaches you rage doesn't reinforce anything, documentation does. He's rebuilding slowly, new apartment, a promotion at work, and last spring, a woman he introduced to me over coffee, careful and a little shy about it, which I took as a good sign. I don't know if he'll ever fully forgive himself for signing what he didn't read. I've told him I already have, and mostly, I mean it. I still keep every document I sign in that same folder in my study. I check it now the way I used to check load calculations before a building went up. Not out of fear, just out of habit, the kind that once nearly saved a marriage, and eventually saved a great deal more. Here's what I'd ask you to take from this, if you take anything at all. Trust is not the opposite of verification. The people worth trusting are the ones who'd never ask you to skip it. If you've ever signed something at a lunch table because someone you loved slid it across to you, I'd like to know. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and whether you checked the paperwork after, or whether, like me, it took an envelope that wasn't yours to finally make you look. Thank you for sitting with this one. I'll see you in the next. This is a work of fiction, inspired by common real-world family and financial dynamics. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.